Today, let's get a real understanding for the Pareto Principle. The goal is to get an intuition for it and not just have it be some kind of fact that you've learned and memorized. So, the real restatement of the Pareto Principle originally started with the observation that a lot of Italy's wealth actually belonged to 20% of the population. So, there's kind of a skew there. But in general, just means that inputs and outputs are generally skewed, right? For workers, for customers, for bugs, for features, the usage, the revenue, all those things are usually not directly correlated. It's not a one-to-one. Certain items are more impactful than others. And one of the big misconceptions is that the numbers need to add to 80 and 20 to 100. It could be anything. 50% of people could be responsible for 80% of the results, or 1% of the workers could do 99% of the work. So it's just, the numbers don't have to add to 100. It just means that we essentially notice that there's a general skewing, and roughly 80-20 is a good rule of thumb, but it doesn't need to add to 100, and it's not a rule of nature where it has to be. It's just kind of a general purpose principle. So let's take a look. What it looks like is this in a chart. And again, charts aren't the best way to understand things, but from a math perspective, you'll see something like this. If effort and reward were one-to-one, every unit of effort would give you the same reward, right? We step forward, we get the same amount up each time. But the Pareto Principle is saying it's something like this, where the initial 20% is actually lifting us quite a bit. And then the last 80% is taking us the final way. So the idea is that instead of it being a one-to-one, it's actually more of a curve. And the curve might be really steep, where the first few items really determine where you're going to be. So that's kind of a better intuition. Again, not good enough, right? I want to see this kind of visually. So take a look at this video here. It's a really cool time lapse of someone drawing a car in Microsoft Paint. I didn't realize Paint could actually do this, or someone could be so talented, but they did a great job. And so it's actually kind of fun. I like the music. It's just a nice video. But as you'll see, the car is evolving over time. The video is roughly 5 minutes long, so each minute is about 20%. And let's take a look at what's happening. Here, we see the progression like this. I just took a few screenshots. So after 1 minute, we have a wireframe. After 2 minutes, we have some colors. After 3 minutes, we have some shading, a little bit of details in the rims here. After 4 minutes, even more shading, a few reflections. After 5 minutes, we have the background and a lot of little details like the headlights. So here's the question. How complete was the car? I'd say, after 1 minute, I had a pretty good idea what the car was going to look like, right? I mean, yeah, there's a few details here, like it's green and this, really fancy, and there's reflections. But ultimately, the fact that it's a car, it's a certain size, it's facing a certain way, all of those details were worked out within the first minute. And the rest was a lot of refinement. Now, it's not easy to refine it, but you sort of know where it's going. So this is the idea. If an artist has 5 minutes and someone wants a car, what should the artist do? This artist could draw them one car in 5 minutes like this. Or they could draw you maybe 5 cars in wireframes, and then you pick the one that you like the best, and then you go off and you design that one. So the idea is that, hey, given a certain amount of time, right, we have limited resources, how far can we get? What's the right trade-off? Does it make sense for the client to see versions that are this complete when they maybe could have had more versions that are this complete? So you sort of see the cost that's relative to the output. Now, of course, the final version probably needs all 5 minutes, but in the beginning, if you're having a planning meeting, maybe sketches are just good enough. And again, that first initial 20% gets you a really good understanding of what the car is going to look like. So I like kind of that visual analogy instead of looking at a chart, because you don't really experience it yourself. So what are a few applications? Well, let's say, you have to read some articles or newspapers. There's, a lot of information coming in. Maybe you spend 5 or 20% glancing through the list, and then you use that to pick the best item, and then you really drill into it, right? So you basically say, okay, I'm going to look through a bunch of articles, and then the top 3, those are the ones I'm going to focus on. Instead of maybe going into a lot of depth on one, you might have a good amount of depth on a few. Or again, for designs, you might make a few quick wireframes instead of trying to perfect a single design. Or even for writing, this is one that I fall into. You have a few ideas for posts, so just kind of outline a few and then see which one really resonates and then go with that, versus trying to put all your thoughts into one glorious, blog post that needs to be the best. Let it be a little bit more fluid, and maybe the best one will jump out at you. So Again, the Pareto Principle, it's an observation, it's not a law of nature, and the idea is to kind of look at that input-output and realize it's not always one-to-one. Sometimes a little bit of input can have a big effect on the output. With that, happy math.